October 26, 1942, over the Santa Cruz Islands, South Pacific. Dawn breaks in a thin, bruised light, and the ocean below looks like hammered steel, dark, restless, endless. On the flight decks of American carriers, the air already stinks of exhaust and hot oil. Propellers blur into translucent discs. Deck crews move with the practiced urgency of men who know that every minute matters, that the first aircraft in the sky might decide who gets to come home. High above the water, the war is not a line on a map. It is vibration in the bones, the tremor of an engine at combat power, the sting of wind that finds every gap in a cockpit seal. American fighters, stubby, compact, built to take off from pitching decks, climb into a sky where visibility can vanish in a smear of haze and cloud. Beneath them, task force formation is a careful geometry of wakes and escorting ships, a moving island of steel that the enemy is hunting. This is a Pacific carrier war at close range. The distance between life and death is measured in seconds. In the moment a lookout spots specks against the sun. In the instant a pilot realizes the specks are growing too fast. Japanese naval aviation has already earned a fearsome reputation. Its pilots, many of them battle-hardened, fly fighters that prize agility and range, aircraft that can turn sharply, accelerate quickly, and strike far from their carriers. In 1942, that combination has been lethal. They come in with discipline and confidence, and they have learned to trust what they see. A burst of fire into an enemy aircraft, a flash, smoke, a sudden sag in the flight path. In many early encounters, that has been the end of the story. But on this morning over the Santa Cruz Islands, the story is beginning to change in a way that no one fully understands yet, not even the men living it. A dogfight is not a clean duel. It is a violent three-dimensional scramble where aircraft whip past at closing speeds that erase the possibility of careful thought. A fighter shudders as rounds hit somewhere, maybe the wing root, maybe the fuselage. Each impact a physical punch. You can almost feel it through the airframe, a harsh vibration that isn't engine trouble, but something worse. There's a sharp, metallic clatter of fragments. There might be smoke. There might be flame. And there's always the sudden question, is this the moment it ends? In 1942, American naval fighters are not helpless. They can fight, they can kill, they can defend the fleet. But too often, damage is catastrophic. Fuel catches, control cables part, engines fail. Even when the pilot survives the initial hit, the aircraft can become a falling machine, a heavy object dropping toward the sea. And the sea is not mercy. It is cold shock. It is waves that can smash and roll a man under. It is minutes ticking by while the battle moves away. Rescue depends on everything going right. A radio call that gets through, a ship or aircraft able to break away. The simple luck of being seen. The Pacific does not reward the wounded. So commanders and engineers begin to think in a way that is both brutal and practical. They do not only ask, how do we shoot the enemy down? They ask, how do we keep our own pilot alive when they're hit? Because every pilot loss is not just a statistic. It is experience gone. Carrier aviation is an expensive craft, measured in training hours, deck landings, navigation skill, gunnery practice, and the calm judgment that only survives combat if the pilot survives combat. In 1942, that reality is still being carved into the Navy's understanding with every strike and counterstrike. Down below, the carriers are under threat from waves of aircraft that might appear over the horizon with almost no warning. Anti-aircraft guns begin to bark, first isolated, then in a swelling chorus. Black bursts bloom in the sky. Tracers arc upward like angry constellations. The sound is a constant tearing rip, mechanical, relentless, layered over the deeper thunder of explosions when bombs find steel. From a Japanese perspective, this is a contest of precision and bravery. Reach the carriers, hit them, set them burning, and the war at sea shifts again. Their pilots press through fire and fighters, some never making it close enough to release. Others do, and the results are immediate and horrifying. A bomb strike is not just a hole in a deck. It is fire rolling along planks and metal. It is shrapnel siding across equipment and bodies. It is aircraft on deck turning into fuel-fed torches. And yet, amid this chaos, something strange happens often enough to be noticed. An American fighter, hit, trailing smoke, riddled with holes, does not always go straight into the water. Sometimes it staggers, nose down, then steadies. It wobbles like a wounded animal, but it stays aloft. The pilot fights the controls, compensating for damage with muscle and instinct. The engine might still be running. The aircraft might still respond, barely. It turns away, not to rejoin the fight, but to run for the moving dot of friendly ships. If you're watching from another cockpit, if you're a Japanese pilot who has just fired what looked like a clean, lethal burst, this can be unsettling. The expectation is simple. Hits like that should end the aircraft. A fighter with fuel lines punctured should burn. A pilot without protection should be killed or incapacitated. A damaged airframe should break under stress. That is what many Japanese aviators have seen when their own planes take similar punishment. The lightweight design that gives them such dazzling maneuverability can also make them fragile when metal meets metal and incendiary rounds find fuel. But the Americans are beginning to build toward a different logic, even if the full expression of it is still in the future. On carriers and at aircraft factories far from the front, the idea is taking shape. Rugged structure, protection for vital systems, measures to reduce fire. Anything that increases the chance that a pilot who gets hit can still fly, still ditch in control way, still be rescued, or, best of all, still land back on the deck. You can feel the shift without anyone naming it. The deck crews patch holes and work miracles with limited time. Maintenance men learn what can be reinforced, what can be replaced, what must be redesigned. Pilots, shaken and exhausted, walk away from aircraft that look like they should be scrapped. Skin torn, panels missing, edges blackened. And in the enemy's mind, a small fracture appears in certainty. Because if the Americans can keep pilots alive through damage that should be fatal, then every engagement becomes more expensive for Japan. Every kill that is a confirmed loss means the same American pilot might be back tomorrow, older, angrier, more skilled, harder to surprise. By the time the battle violence begins to ebb, it is clear that the carrier war is not only about bold strikes. It is about endurance. The side that can absorb punishment and keep fighting, keep launching, keep recovering, keep training, will eventually dominate the sky above the sea. And as the battered ships and exhausted airmen withdraw into the uncertain Pacific light, the question hangs over everyone who understands what they witnessed. If survival could be engineered, if protection could be built into the machine, what happens when the Americans finally field a fighter designed not just to win fights, but to bring its pilot home after being hit? By 1943, the Pacific has taught the U.S. Navy its lessons the hard way, through burning decks, empty chairs in ready rooms, and the quiet arithmetic of a carrier air group trying to stay whole. The men who plan the war can feel in the numbers, but the men who fly it feel it in their ribs. The difference between a hit that means pain and terror and a hit that means death. On a carrier in the Central Pacific, the day begins long before the sun clears the horizon. Red lights glow faintly in interior passageways. Flight crews move with purposeful silence, boots thudding on steel. In the ready room, pilots sit shoulder to shoulder under drifting cigarette smoke, eyes fixed on a map board as an officer traces routes with a pointer. The briefing is short, matter-of-fact. Headings, altitudes, fuel, the probable enemy reaction. No flourish. Nobody needs a speech to understand what happens when the plan collides with reality. Then the door opens to the hangar deck and the world changes. Engine noise, the bite of salt air, the smell of gasoline so sharp it seems to coat the tongue. Up above, the flight deck is already alive, aircraft chalked and spotted, men crouching at wingtips and tail wheels, hands raised in signals. A carrier is never still. It bucks and rolls with the sea, and the aircraft on it feel like living things straining against restraint. And among them now is something new, larger, heavier looking, with a blunt, muscular confidence in its lines. The Grumman F-6F Hellcat, is not built with delicacy in mind. It is built with the assumption that it will be hit and must keep flying anyway. From the outside, the difference is visible even before a pilot straps in. The Hellcat's airframe looks like it has mass, structure that doesn't seem eager to crumple. Mechanics move beneath it with the familiar ritual of the pre-flight, checking panels, inspecting control surfaces, wiping oil, testing the field machine. They are not thinking in abstract terms like survivability. They are thinking in practical ones. Will it start? Will it climb? Will it take punishment and still come back to land on a deck the size of a city block? When the pilot climbs into the cockpit, the intimacy of the war returns. Harness straps bite into shoulders. The canopy frames the world in thick metal arcs. Instruments stare back like watchful eyes. Ahead, the carrier's deck drops away into open ocean, and the Hellcat's engine, powerful, deep-throated, fills the aircraft with vibration. The signal comes. Throttle forward. The aircraft surges, tail rising, the deck racing beneath the wheels. For a heartbeat, there is only the carrier's bow and the onrushing void. And then the Hellcat is airborne. There is no magic in it, only engineering choices made for a specific war. U.S. aircraft designers and Navy requirements increasingly prioritize the pilot and the aircraft's ability to survive damage, rugged construction, armor protection for the pilot, and self-sealing fuel tanks that reduce the chance of a small puncture becoming a sudden, consuming fire. These are not guarantees. A direct hit can still end everything in an instant. But in the brutal middle ground between no damage and catastrophic destruction, these features matter. The Hellcat is also a response to what the Navy has faced. American aviators have learned what it means to fight agile opponents in lighter fighters, aircraft that can turn tightly and accelerate quickly, but often carry less protection. Japanese pilots have learned their own lessons too. Speed and precision can win the first exchanges. A clean burst can decide a duel. In 1943, those assumptions begin to collide. Over a target, maybe an outpost, a shipping lane, an island airfield, formations break apart into geometry of survival. The sky fills with aircraft at different altitudes and angles, each pilot trying to stay out of the other's gun sight while forcing his own aim. The Hellcat, like every fighter, can be killed, but when it is hit, it is more likely to do something the Japanese have come to believe is rare. It stays controllable long enough to escape. Imagine the view from the other side for a moment. A Japanese pilot, trained to press close, to commit, fires and sees strikes. He expects the enemy aircraft to erupt, or at least to fall away into the ocean's waiting mouth. Instead, the American fighter shudders, staggers, and then keeps going. Smoke trails, but the plane does not fold. It dips, regains balance, and begins a long run back toward the horizon where the carriers wait. That moment does not feel like a tactical inconvenience. It feels like an insult to the rules of the fight. For American pilots, the same moment feels like a miracle earned by steel and design. Because making it back is not a cinematic glide. It is labor. It is the aircraft vibrating oddly because something is bent. It is the controls feeling heavy or spongy. It is the engine note changing in a way the pilot cannot ignore. It is the constant fear that fire will ignite behind the instrument panel, or that a damaged wing will tear under stress if the pilot turns too hard. And beneath it all is the simple, desperate focus. Keep the nose steady, keep altitude, keep the aircraft flying long enough to find friendly ships. When a damaged Hellcat returns to the carrier, the deck crew sees the war written in metal. Holes through the skin, shredded panels, jagged tears where flak or cannon rounds ripped past structure. Sometimes the aircraft lands hard or swerves or collapses as it rolls out, its strength spent the moment it finally reaches safety. The pilot climbs out with hands that shake from adrenaline, boots unsteady on the deck's moving surface. No cheering, no speeches, just a brief look at the wounds the aircraft carried home, and the unspoken understanding that without that ruggedness, the pilot would be a dark speck in the sea. This is where the strategic consequences begin to appear in human form. Every time an American pilot survives being hit, Every time a self-sealing tank prevents a fire, every time armor turns what would have been a fatal strike into a wound, the Navy keeps something that Japan is increasingly struggling to keep: experienced aviators. Combat skill is not theoretical. It is learned through fear and repetition, through near misses and mistakes that don't kill you, through recognizing an enemy's approach a fraction of a second earlier the next time. Japan's lighter fighters, brilliant in certain conditions, often do not offer the same margin. When they are hit, they can fail quickly, fuel igniting, structure giving way, a pilot exposed with less protection. That means fewer chances to learn from the close calls, fewer veterans returning to train newcomers, fewer men carrying hard-earned instincts into the next battle. And the Japanese commanders, watching sortie reports, listening to growing lists of aircraft that should have been destroyed, begin to face a quiet, creeping problem. The Americans are not merely improving tactics. They are changing the physical terms of survival. The enemy is becoming harder to finish. By late 1943, this truth is spreading through the Pacific like a cold front. It is there in the maintenance crews exhausting tempo, patching and replacing, and turning aircraft around because more of them are coming back. It is there in the ready rooms, where pilots who might have been lost a year earlier are still alive to brief the next day's mission. And it is there, too, in the enemy's growing frustration, a sense of the old expectations, what a good hit should do, what a damaged aircraft must do, are no longer reliable. The sky is not just filling with American planes. It is filling with American planes that can be hit, stagger, and still return, bringing their pilots with them. And as 1944 approaches, the war is about to demand something even greater than survival in a single dogfight. It is about to demand survival through attrition, through mass battles where the difference between a pilot who comes back and a pilot who doesn't will decide the future of the Pacific. The calendar turns, and with it the rhythm of the war changes. By 1944, the Pacific conflict is no longer a series of isolated shocks. It is momentum, measured in new airfields carved from coral, in fleets that move farther west, in carrier task forces that appear where a year earlier they could not. The distances remain enormous, but the United States is learning how to cross them repeatedly, predictably, and at scale. On a carrier's flight deck, that scale has a sound. Engines starting in sequence, propellers beating the air into a steady roar. It has a look. Long rows of fighters and bombers spotted for launch, wings folded and unfolded like a mechanical flock, preparing to rise. It has a feeling, vibration to the steel as catapults fire, as aircraft leap off the bow and drop for a breathless second before climbing into the sky. The men in the aircraft do not talk about grand strategy while they're strapped in. They think about fuel consumption. They think about keeping formation. They think about the first sighting of enemy aircraft, how fast it will come, from what direction, and whether they will be ready. But behind them, in the ship's interior, maps and reports are accumulating into something commanders cannot ignore. There's a pattern in the air war now, one that does not depend on a single brilliant tactic or a single lucky day. The Americans are staying in the fight longer. Their pilots are returning more often. Their aircraft, built for ruggedness, are coming back full of holes and still landing. This is not invincibility. It is a margin, an engineering-made margin that compounds over weeks and months and then turns into a chasm. You can see it most clearly in the moments between battles, where survival becomes a system rather than a miracle. A Hellcat rolls into the landing pattern with a wobble that tells the landing signal officer something is wrong. The aircraft approach is careful, unusually steady, because a damaged plane cannot afford last-second corrections. The deck crew braces. The tailhook catches. The aircraft slams to a stop, the tires squealing, and for a moment it looks as though the machine might simply collapse from exhaustion. When the engine shuts down, the silence is almost shocking. Then the canopy opens. The pilot climbs out, legs stiff, face pale beneath sweat and salt. Mechanics gather immediately, pointing at punctures, at torn metal, at a blackened section near the wing root. Somewhere in the aircraft skin, A piece of enemy fire has passed through places it should never have passed through. This is where the war's hidden economy becomes visible. Every one of those holes is proof of a threat survived. Every pilot who steps onto the deck again is experience preserved. In the American system, that experience feeds back into training and operations. A pilot who survives a mission can speak in the ready room with authority about what worked and what didn't, about how the enemy attacks, about how quickly a fight can shift, about what it feels like when an aircraft takes damage, and how to nurse a home. That knowledge becomes institutional. It is repeated. It is practiced. It becomes the difference between a novice's panic and a veteran's controlled aggression. Japan, meanwhile, is facing its own reality, a reality shaped by a different philosophy of aircraft design and a different industrial situation. Japanese fighters had achieved remarkable agility and range earlier in the war, and their pilots had exploited those qualities with deadly skill. But those advantages come with costs when the enemy begins to field fighters that are both powerful and hard to kill, and when the war becomes a grinding contest of replacement and training. In the cockpit of a lighter Japanese aircraft, the fight is still intense, still fast, still built on speed and precision. But the vulnerability is always there. When an American fighter's guns connect, when heavy rounds strike wing roots or fuselages, there is less protection between metal and pilot, less insulation against fire, less structural mass to absorb damage without immediate failure. The margin for survival shrinks. This is not a judgment about courage. Japanese aviators continue to fly with determination, many facing odds that grow worse by the month. It is a mechanical reality, and the air war does not negotiate with it. And now, as American operations push deeper into the Central Pacific, the tempo becomes relentless. A strike launches. It returns. Another launches. The carriers become moving factories of combat power, and the fighters that guard them, now increasingly dominated by Hellcats and other improved U.S. naval aircraft, are asked to do everything: escort, intercept, patrol, attack, return, repeat. The days blur into cycles of briefings, launches, landings, maintenance, and exhaustion. The sea is always there, a constant heaving backdrop. The sky is always waiting to fill with threats. For Japanese commanders, the reports from these encounters begin to carry a particular sting. Not just that the enemy is strong, but that the enemy does not stay down. A Japanese pilot may report that an American fighter was struck repeatedly, that smoke poured from it, that it descended sharply, yet it did not break apart, did not burn, did not simply vanish into the ocean. Another report notes an American aircraft returning to its formation despite damage. Another, an American fighter limping away, trailing something from its tail, but still flying. At first, such accounts can be dismissed as fog of war confusion. Air combat is chaotic. Pilots can misjudge distances, misread outcomes, lose track of an aircraft in the glare of sun and cloud. Claims do not always match wreckage. From the viewpoint of a Japanese pilot, this can look like a failed kill. He has done what he has been trained to do: close in, fire, hit vital areas. In earlier phases of the war, such hits often produced immediate results. But now, the American aircraft structure and protective features can turn what would have been a death sentence into a wounded escape. Self-sealing fuel tanks mean that a puncture does not always become a torch. Armor means that fragments and rounds do not always reach the pilot with lethal certainty. Rugged construction means that an aircraft can be shot through and still have enough integrity to remain controllable. The result is psychological as much as tactical. In a massive battle like the Philippine Sea, morale and expectation can swing on what pilots witness in seconds. When Japanese aviators repeatedly see American fighters absorb damage and continue fighting, or at least continue flying, the normal mental map of the engagement starts to blur. Because if the enemy does not fall when hit, then the fight demands more time on target, more ammunition, more exposure. And exposure is deadly when the American side has more fighters in the sky and increasingly coordinated interception. For American pilots, the survivability margin becomes a weapon, not in the sense of arrogance, but in the sense of freedom. A pilot who believes his aircraft can take a hit and still respond may stay just a fraction longer to ensure his shots count. He may press an attack knowing that if he's struck, he has at least a chance, maybe not guaranteed, but a chance, of making it back to the carrier. And the carriers themselves are not passive stages. Their anti-aircraft defenses and fighter direction work together, creating a layered shield that Japanese attackers must penetrate. The incoming raids arrive in waves, and each wave is met by interceptions that begin farther out, forcing Japanese pilots to fight simply to reach a position where they can attack ships. The battle scale makes its patterns unmistakable. Aircraft fall in numbers. Pilots are lost, but the side that can replace losses and keep experienced men alive gains compounding advantage. Here, the underlying truth that has been building since 1942 reaches a kind of clarity. Survivability is not just personal, it is strategic. Japanese commanders, receiving reports and watching the results, face a harsh contradiction. Their pilots may be brave and skilled, but they're flying into a system designed to keep American pilots alive and keep American aircraft returning. Even when Japanese pilots score hits, the outcomes are not always final. A damaged American plane may still limp away, denying the Japanese the certainty of a kill and returning a pilot to fight again. At the same time, American firepower and numbers mean that when Japanese aircraft are hit, survival is less likely. The attrition is asymmetric, and in a battle of this magnitude, asymmetric attrition becomes decisive. By the end of the day, the scale of Japanese losses, especially among pilots, becomes part of the battle's grim legacy. Exact tallies and claims can vary depending on sources and categories of aircraft and missions, and the fog of war affects any single number, but the broader consequence is not disputed. Japan's carrier air power suffers a devastating blow, and its ability to replace experienced aviators continues to erode. And in the aftermath, the shock is not only that the Americans won, it is the way they won. They won through a system, radar, coordination, mass production, and aircraft design with survivability in mind. The image that lingers is not simply a Japanese aircraft falling. It is of American fighters returning to their decks with torn skins and living pilots stepping down into the arms of a machine and a Navy that had learned, through blood, how to protect them. Because in the Pacific, survival was never just about luck. By 1944, it had become something close to doctrine. Steel and rubber and armor woven into the very structure of a fighter, turning hits that should have killed into scars that could be repaired. And that is the moment the balance shifts for good. When the enemy realizes that even when they do everything right, close fire strike, the Americans may still come home.